Hi there, John Hyatt. Um, I just wanted to make a few more comments here on the night before uh, the 4th of July, uh, before the celebration of the 250th birthday of the United States. Uh, I guess what I really want to get across is 4th of July. No, I think I asked before, is it a big deal? Yes, it is a huge deal. It is a very big deal. And so I plan to be celebrating tomorrow. I plan to march in a parade. Going to go see a movie about the young George Washington. Hopefully going to catch some fireworks. In fact, I can hear people shooting off fireworks in the neighborhood around me now. So, yeah, it's a big deal. But the date itself is kind of odd, July the 4th. Is that the right day to celebrate America's birthday? I think so. But there are other competing dates. So, for instance, June 7th was when Richard Henry Lee submitted the resolution which actually called for the United States to separate from Great Britain. And that resolution was approved on July the 2nd, not July the 4th. However, they had already intended to make a declaration of independence. As they say in the declaration, they needed to set forth the reasons why they felt compelled to separate themselves from Great Britain. And so the Committee of Five was working on drafting the Declaration of Independence. Of course, the primary writer there was Thomas Jefferson, but it wasn't Jefferson's version that was finally approved. There were edits by the Committee of Five, and then there were edits on the floor of the Congress, and that editing process went on through July the 3rd and actually into the morning of July the 4th. What actually happened on July the 4th? Well, what happened was a vote, and the vote was to approve of the Declaration of Independence. You got to understand, though, that what they were approving was a draft that had all kinds of things marked out and other words written over, which was the result of the editing process that Congress was going through. So the Declaration of Independence itself, the document, was not in a final form that could be signed. It was a final draft uh, of it, and it was that draft that was approved, and all of the language that is in the Declaration today was what was approved on July the 4th. And all of the colonies, with the exception of New York, voted in favor. So several days later, July the 9th, New York finally realized that they shouldn't be the party pooper. And so they joined the rest of the colonies in approving of the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence was a document that was treason. Any of the people who had approved it or signed it certainly could be hung uh, by the British, hanged by the British. And this is why Benjamin Franklin said, "We must hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." So they were signing their own death sentence in a sense. However, they didn't sign on July the 4th. They voted on July the 4th, and it was the vote that made the Declaration active. However, the piece of paper itself was a mess, and so they needed to have it rewritten. Now, what they did approve also on that day was to have it printed. So they rushed it off to a printer, and so the printed versions of the Declaration are in one sense older than the document that we see with all the fancy handwriting and with John Hancock's name at the bottom of it. So the printed versions were printed out like right away. I think they were actually printed and starting to be distributed the next day after the Declaration was voted on by the printer. And so those printed versions went out to all the colonies, committees of safety, the Army, and all over the place. But in the meantime, there needed to be an official copy of the Declaration that was to be signed. So that process of writing it out is called engrossing. And so they handed over to a guy named Timothy Matlack, who apparently had nice handwriting. And Timothy Matlack wrote out the Declaration of Independence as we know it today, the script version. So he wrote it all out. Well, it took him a while to get that done. So the paper wasn't actually ready to be signed by the delegates until August the 2nd. So it was on August the 2nd of 1776 that John Hancock actually put his name to that parchment and said he was going to write it big enough so that King George III didn't need his spectacles to read it. And then all the others signed around him, and it was kind of a crazy process. And there were some people who needed to sign it or wanted to sign it and weren't there. Either they had to go home, they were sick, whatever it was, they weren't there. And so the process of signing the Declaration went on as late as November. There were still delegates coming to sign it, but the majority of the delegates and the majority of the colonies did sign on August 2nd, and then the others trickled in as they could. But what about after the signing of the Declaration? What did the signing of the Declaration achieve? Were we then automatically free and independent of Great Britain? Afraid not. So the Declaration of Independence was a document expressing really a hope, an intention. But it would take years of war before the truth of the Declaration of Independence became an actual thing, because the Treaty of Paris was not signed until 1782. And most of the Revolutionary War happened after the Declaration of Independence was signed. So, and Great Britain would have very much said, and in fact, the other countries that eventually became our allies, like France and Spain, did they consider the United States to be an independent country on July the 4th, 1776? No way. Nope, they did not. It took hard fighting and winning of battles before other countries began to accept that, yes, the United States is an actual country. And then, of course, Great Britain would not accept it until 1782. And then you might say that they tried to take it all back in 1812. So we're going to celebrate the 250th anniversary tomorrow. But there's a whole lot more 250th anniversaries to go. All the battles that happened afterward, after the Declaration of Independence was signed, the battles that made the statements in the Declaration of Independence a real thing, those have yet to come to their 250th anniversary. And in my humble opinion, we need to celebrate all of those. We need to celebrate the big battles of Saratoga and Monmouth and Kings Mountain and Cowpens and Guilford Courthouse and Yorktown, all of those 250th anniversaries are yet to come. And it was those battles that actually made America free. We could state that we wanted to be free on July the 4th, 1776, but it was the blood of American revolutionaries spilled on the battlefields. It was their suffering, it was their struggle that made American independence a real thing. So I hope that you will, along with me, continue to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States all the way up until 2032. 2032 will be the anniversary of the Treaty of Paris. And it was at that point that the world recognized that the United States was a free and independent nation. Y'all have a great day and a happy 4th and a happy 250th anniversary to the United States, and praise God for the miracle that He accomplished in giving us our country and our freedom.